talking at the same time is
Hi everybody, welcome to Seneca Studios Open Studios Night for May 2024. We are thrilled to have Garton here.
Hi.
Seneca Studios does a lot, and this is our favorite thing. We bring people together, and tonight during this event we have brought Connor to this community to show off his skills. And so we're thrilled to have you here. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
What got you into glass? Where are you from?
I'm from a county called Dorset in South England, and I started glass making when I was a teenager, 17 roughly, and I worked in some small bespoke glass shops to get things going, and worked in industrial glass, art glass for the last 10, 11 years. So,
really?
Yeah.
Well, glass is, someone recently described glass as a mediator, which I think is a really interesting term.
Yeah.
I think of it as a connector, and that's truly this organization as well.
Yeah.
So what is it about glass that really inspires you?
There's just a lot of aspects to it, really. I mean, you can get very hands-on with the material, but it's a very difficult material to work with too. So the idea of problem solving is the most attractive aspect to the process for me. I would say. Yeah.
Well, we're thrilled to have you here. You're going to make something pretty interesting. So tell us a little bit about what the demonstration's going to be to me.
Yeah. So the fallow deer series, I'm going to kind of continue that series, and so these kind of solid glass deer shapes with 3 different colors in them that incorporate some blowing aspects, some solid sculpting aspects, and I think it'll fill the demo slot very well. I think it'll be entertaining.
Yeah, well, it's beautiful work. What does the deer represent for you?
So it represents my culture as well as the wildlife in Texas too, because the fallow deer are a specific breed that were brought over by the Germans, by the Brits, in the 1800s. So it's a good way to kind of connect me with the workshop here in Dallas, Fort Worth.
Cool. Well, stay tuned, everybody. We're going to do about a 2-hour demonstration. Connor's going to sculpt this deer. We got a great team. It takes a team to make the dream, right? So I want to thank everybody involved, and I want to thank you guys for tuning in. Check the chat. We'll be monitoring. If you have questions, feel free to ask away. And if you're in the area, stop by. It's going to be a great night.
All right.
welcome to Open Studios Online. You've just tuned in to be able to see Connor starting to work on a sculptural piece tonight. He has started to marver some cane roll-up prepped glass that he'd already made slightly before the demo. So he's using this marver, which is a steel table, M-A-R-V-E-R, to shape and cool that glass to prepare it for the sculpting process. So prior to this, he had taken lots of different sticks of glass that we call cane. And currently Krista is working with it, which might be hard to hear. That might have been a little difficult to hear because we had the lovely fluffy torch on to selectively heat that hot glass and make sure that everything stays nice and warm and toasty and happy. But Connor has what we call, the technique is a stuffed cup process. So he had added solid glass into the inside of a previously blown cup that has a lovely cane roll up on it. And what cane is long strips of glass that have been pulled out that usually have color on it to create those nice striation patterns. So that's going to be the outside pattern, and then the inside's going to be a nice little latte color. So still, again, currently cooling and shaping, working pretty quickly because glass tends to cool off very fast. At 2100 degrees is when it's its happiest. So as soon as it starts to cool off, that glass stops being as malleable. So you have to make sure that you're working quickly. Otherwise, the glass isn't going to move. So the nice thing about glass blowing is we're constantly having to work in a team, especially when we're making large works. So right now we have Kevin shielding Krista while she takes a heat and getting that glass nice and hot. Because what we're working with already is so large that we have to have one of those doors open on our reheating chambers. And that can get all the way up to about 2,300 degrees if it's been on for a while. So that can be quite hot. And we use some wooden paddles to shield each other's arms to make sure that we don't get burned. So Krista's over here helping shape it up and marver it a little bit more, getting it into a happy shape to be able to start to work with. And then we have Connor here with a pair of jacks. Those are the big metal tools that you see him working with. And it's creating a jack line. And what that is a constriction point at the head of the pipe, so that when it comes time to start to break this off of the pipe, because we have to be able to do something, otherwise we're not going to be able to keep it on the pipe while it cools. So that jack line creates a nice constriction point where it's going to break nice and smooth, and we'll have control over how that glass breaks. So right now that he's created that constriction line, he's gone back in and he's starting to heat up just that end of the glass, because that's what he's going to want to have move. A lot of the times in glass blowing, we selectively heat and cool what we're wanting to do, because depending on what we're trying to create, we might not want to have all of the gooey glob of glass moving at one time. So we let certain spots cool, set up, so that we can make intentional marks on the glass where it's still hot and gooey. So if we would have heated up that entire part of that glass where he made that constriction line, because there's so much mass on the end, we wouldn't have any control over how that glass is moving, because it would be a big, heavy section being held up by a very small point. So now he's just using a little bit of newspaper to cool and shape that glass. I've always thought that the interesting thing about glass blowing is that half of the time we're using materials and tools that burn as it touches the molten glass. So a lot of the times you'll see us use newspaper, cork, wood to shape that glass. And the other couple of materials that are also very prevalent in shaping is going to be steel and graphite. Now, a lot of artists will create specific steel-shaped tools to be able to sculpt and make different textures necessary to create their art. So now he's coming in with a pair of tweezers to start to manipulate that glass a little bit more. And the interesting thing about it is a lot of the times the glass sculpture doesn't look like what you have planned until the very end. So you're always having to think about what move you're making at about 5 to 7 steps before you're actually doing it. Anytime that you're sculpting, you have to really plan out the process prior to working so that you can heat and shape accordingly. Nice rotations from Krista, keeping it nice and center, always turning. It's one of those things where it takes about 6 months to get used to always turning while thinking about the project that you're working on. So a lot of glass blowers once they've gotten that turning down, they will start turning anything in their hands all the time because it becomes such a natural thing to do. So now Connor's using what we call diamond shears to clip and cool and shape, and then he's back to the tweezers.
So, Connor is aggressively influencing this.
So as you've noticed, he'll work on it and he'll let it drop and fall down because gravity's a thing. So it's always going to start to drip towards that floor. So he'll work on it for a minute and then flip it over and let it fall back so that he's constantly battling not only gravity, but also the glass, because the glass is trying to cool off, it's trying to move the way that it wants to. So you have to be very precise on your motions and movements. Ooh, look at it go. It's already starting to take form. So Kevin's over here on doors getting ready in case there's going to be another door that needs to be opened. Because the bigger it gets, the more space is necessary, and as that glass gets hot in that reheating chamber, it's going to start to move, it's going to start to flop around a little bit more, and so you always have to be ready to have that door open up so that it doesn't stick to it, because if you come out of that reheating chamber and the glass tags that door, is what we call it, tagging the door, sticking to the door, touching the door, it'll become a nice sticky gooey mess, because the glass always wants to have something hot to stick to, and those doors are definitely hot, about 2200 degrees. So everybody here is working together. Krista's helping to turn the pipe as Connor's sculpting his piece, and Kevin's ready to help shield wherever Connor's hand might be getting hot. So Connor is asking for a taglia, which is a lovely steel paddle that he's going to use to shape up that glass. And there's a lot of communication that happens between everybody. So thank y'all again for tuning in. There he goes, starting to carve up in between the legs of the horse that he's sculpting tonight.
You gotta work together. It's really hot, so he's having Kristen take it.
Sometimes it can be a little mesmerizing, and I'll start watching and then forget that I need to say things. It really, working with this large amount of glass really is a very physical process. And you have to be very ready to always be moving with the way that the glass is reacting. And those little legs are going to start to cool off much faster than the rest of the inside of the belly section of that horse, because the more glass there is, the more heat it retains. So then the thinner those sections become, the faster that glass is going to start to cool off. So not only battling that gravity, he's really battling how quickly is that glass cooling off, trying to keep those temperatures even, trying to make sure that the glass stays in the space that he's wanting it to. So there's a lot of different variables that happen when you're sculpting hot glass. It's a lot of multitasking. It's kind of like pat your head, rub your belly, roll the hot stuff all at one time, which takes a lot of practice and a lot of understanding of the material. But really the best way to learn about that material is by letting things break. So hopefully we don't see that tonight, but if we do, it will be a lovely learning experience. Oh, it's a deer. Oh, it's a deer. the other family of the horse.
You got the head up or down? I agree.
Nice.
One more reading and shake it up. So moving around today.
So the wonderful part about this is everybody's been working together for a while now because they had started to prep some of that cane roll prior to this. That between the communication that they're having and their knowledge of the glass, they're able to all work in tandem to create Connor's lovely deer. I've always equated glass blowing to sport, kind of like wrestling, where you're always having to plan and anticipate your opponent's next move, and in this case it's glass. So he created that lovely movement in that neck to give it a really wonderful posture that mimics that movement that a deer would have in the forest. So if you're just tuning in, you're watching Connor Garton work on a sculptural deer here at Seneca. Seneca is a nonprofit school and gallery for glass. And we have open studios every second Friday of the month where you can come and watch our visiting artist demo from 6 to 9. And our visiting artist this month is Connor Garton. So right now Krista is creating what looks to be a punty. A punty is a solid rod of steel with a little bit of glass on the end of it, and that is used to be able to transfer glass from one end of a punty or a pipe to another. Because right now we've seen Connor working on the front half of the deer, but you have to be able to start to sculpt the back end of the deer. And if you were to try to heat up that back end of that deer, with the front being already sculpted, the front is going to start to melt in and become more globular again, because that's what glasses always want to do, is start to melt back into itself. So you have to be able to figure out how to flip that glass around to be able to work on the other side. So here in a second we're going to be seeing a very exciting part of the process. It's where every glass blower holds their breath. And this lovely shape is very important because the more accurate that punty shape is, the better chance there is of success. So Connor's going to give one more heat to that piece to make sure that it doesn't get too cold, so that when they go to attach and break it off, it should break where they want it to. Thermal shock is a thing with hot glass when you're in any glass. So if you don't have the temperatures at the correct heat, it's very easy for the glass to break other than where you want it to. So making the last couple of adjustments. checking that heat. About to use the fluffy torch. So with that punty, you attach it to a spot where it's going to stay really centered and in line with the pipe. And once it's been attached and sticks and everybody feels comfortable with it, we'll add a little bit of water to that constriction line, that jack line that we had talked about a little bit earlier. And that water's creating that thermoshock so that when he goes to tap that pipe and create a little bit of a vibration, it should break free from that pipe exactly where he's wanting it to. So ready? And there it goes. Lovely job. And that's how you'll get to be able to start to sculpt the back end of that deer. So now they're equalizing that heat again because that back end of that sculpture had started to get pretty chilly because it has to be cold for it to break. If you were to try to break that off when the glass was hot and moving, it would basically stick to the pipe, kind of like chewing gum in the middle of the summer where you go to step on it and it just kind of sticks. But the amazing part about this is you have several pounds of glass being held up by one small little piece. Krista was doing two things. She was keeping the smaller sections of the glass hot using what we call a hot torch. That was that finer flame that she had. And then she was also heating up that top section, or I guess now the back end of that deer with the fluffy torch so that it could continue to stay hot while letting that punty set up. And the reason for that is if you have that punty starting to move, it's going to make it harder to control and harder to choose where to start to manipulate the glass, because then you're fighting that movement the whole time. So what he was doing was letting that punty set up while retaining some of that heat by using the fluffy torch to keep that glass from cooling off all at once. Take a few times because they're having to build that heat back up. If you were to try to get it really hot really fast just by using the reheating chamber, then you don't have as much control over where that heat is going. can see that glass starting to glow a little bit more, which means he's started to really build up that heat.
So there's a lot of like balancing and understanding.
And there's a lot of communication happening between Krista and Connor right now because she's controlling the pipe at his request. So they have to be almost working one and the same. And there is a lot of heat radiating off of this massive glass. So I don't know if you saw, but Connor dunked his hand in the water to help shield him from that heat. Building that back up again. Every part of this process is really important. Kevin being on doors is making it possible to be able to get in and out of that reheating chamber safely. And Connor, who is sculpting the piece, he's who we would call the gaffer because he is the one creating the work. He's in charge of the process. He's having the assistants do and help out where necessary so that they can create his ideas. It really does take a team. And it takes years to start to understand how that glass works, what the heat's like, how's it glowing, how's it moving, how's it turning. But then depending on where you're at, there's a lot of different types of glass. So there's kiln form glass, which is sheet glass, which you are usually manipulating when it is cold and then firing it in a kiln. There's flame worked glass where it's making little beads and some very intricate things that can end up very large actually. But that's usually just a hot torch. And then there's hot shot glass, which in each of those areas there's multiple different chemical makeups of that glass, and not all glass likes to work together. And each glass works differently, so it's constantly trying to learn what is the material that you're working with, what are signs of getting too hot and too cold, and what is the cooling and heating ratio speed of that glass. Form's really starting to take shape. So we use lots of different flames in here. That was a propane-based flame. So they're using gravity right now to help that glass straighten up and stretch out at the same time. And then readjusting those legs. It's constant adjustments that happen in glass. Because every time you go into that heat, the material's always moving. Awesome.
They're probably going to work some heat into the gut at this stage and let it stretch a little bit. I think they'll probably isolate some heat in the middle. But once it gets long,
So this is a solid piece of glass that we're working on. Some sculptors will blow into form and then sculpt it so that the piece is hollow, but this is just one solid mass of glass, which is heavy and takes a lot of practice to be able to get that heat right, because you're always hoping that that internal core and that external skin of the glass stay pretty equalized. You want the inside to stay hot enough that it doesn't get too cold, but not so hot that it's moving on you, so that you can have control over how the rest of the glass is moving. Oh, cute tail. Yeah. Several different types of glass classes to come and take. We have a Sparks workshop where you can come in and make the seasonal item in the hot shop and the flame working areas and even in kiln form. And then we also have experience glass classes, so that's in the hot shop. That's going to be making whatever the seasonal item is. So right now it's terrariums, and then a paperweight. So you get to come in and experience a very similar part of this process. With those experience classes, you get to also make a paperweight. So this manipulating and shaping that he's doing with that tweezers, you get to do on a slightly smaller scale, something a little bit more manageable if it's your first time working in hot glass, where you get to come in and manipulate that glass, twist it up, create a nice color pattern, and then shape it up to create a nice paperweight. There's also a bit more class where it's you and one other person working with an instructor and assistant to create a wide variety of different options. All this you can find at our website, but I highly recommend coming in and hanging out and seeing what hot glass is all about, because there's no material that's quite like it. So you can really start to see that cane roll-up pattern from earlier that he had stuffed that clear glass into, or it's not exactly all clear glass, because we saw him roll up on that powder a little bit to create that nice latte color tan brown, which I don't know if you remember, but when it was in powder form, it looks more white. So the colors can be very deceiving. So now he's getting ready to transfer it again to clean up the neck section of that deer that is currently attached to that punty. So Krista's getting another hot punty ready. That metal's gotta be hot because glass won't stick to cold metal. So you have to always preheat those pipes and punties to make sure that you're able to wind up that glass. That's what we call gathering. She's into that furnace right now that's about 300 pounds of molten glass. And then cooling off that pipe. And then she'll reshape it into another punty to be able to transfer that deer from one end back to another. So even though it looks bright orange, that's actually just clear glass. The reason that it still looks orange is because it's hot. So it's retaining that energy and that heat. But as it cools, you'll see it start to go more clear, start to look more like the clear glass that we know. These are all very finesse movements here that are happening. You want to have that in the right shape, but you also want to have the right heat so that it sticks properly. And that's the interesting part about it, because you want it to stick, but you don't want it to fully fuse or it won't break off cleanly. So what's amazing is that it ends up being stuck on by basically a piece of chewing gum.
You okay with this?
So now they're re-sticking it to the deer, giving it a little bit of heat. Krista's cooling off the back end of that punty. Checking to see if it's stable. And then here comes that make or break. So adding that little bit of water. One more little thing of water to create that thermal shock. I mean, a little vibration breaks it right off. And then straight up to let it sink down onto that punty and really become secure.
Yes.
I mean, it's really being held on by a little piece of glass that's about the size of a quarter. So if you can imagine several pounds of hot glass being attached by just that small connection point, you really have to be really precise on what that heat and that shape is to give yourself the best possibility of a successful outcome. So right now they're letting that punty set back up, because earlier I mentioned if it had started moving a whole lot on that back end of that punty, it's going to be really hard to be able to control and shape it the way that's necessary. So what Krista's doing right now is using what we call a hot torch, so that's oxygen and propane. to really heat up that section that was currently punted to. That's going to help melt it in, make that glass really soft. So then he's going to be able to manipulate that section and smooth it out and make it look like it never happened.
This torch we call the hot torch. That runs on oxygen and propane, so that's a much hotter torch.
This is one of the hottest flames that we have in this shop. And it's used to create extremely selective heats when sculpting. It's also a tool that we'll use to what we call fire polish the end of a punty. So after you've broken off, let's say a vase, there's always going to be that little punty mark that we just saw that a lot of artists will go in and use that hot torch to fire polish it out to make sure that it's not sharp and it becomes a nice smooth surface. So now he's using that tag or taglia to start to smush that glass back in and really just sculpt the surface of the glass. So if you're just tuning in, Connor's almost finished sculpting a really lovely deer with a beautiful cane roll-up pattern. Here at Seneca Studios. So after every time we move and shape that glass, we always have to go back and reheat it because the working time is really anywhere between 15 seconds to a minute and a half. So we're constantly having to go back and forth to maintain that heat so that that glass doesn't crack. So now everybody's in helping. So I think what I just heard is they're going to give it a quick little heat, and then they're going to torch those ears and start to pull them to a point to give it a little bit more definition. If you were to try to do that at the very beginning of the process, then by the time that you finished heating everything, it's going to round down and just melt away, and all those lovely little details that you would have shaped would have melted back in. So you always want to wait until the very end to get any of the small little details completed. So this is the interesting part where everybody's working together again because that glass has still got to be continuously moving. And Krista's chasing those ears with the hot torch to make sure to keep introducing that heat. And now Connor's using those diamond shears to pull it to a point and then cut it off. And that's the wonderful part about glass is when it's nice and hot and movable, you can cut it almost like paper, almost, not quite. But I've always said that if you can hear the glass, it's too cold to be able to do anything. Back to do that to the other ear, while the whole time making sure that the piece doesn't get so hot that those legs start to move. So again, pulling, clipping it off, and then giving it a quick little heat so that it smooths out that section of the glass, because every time you cut the glass, it becomes sharp. So you have to introduce that flame and that heat back to it so that it softens those edges. And it looks like they are just about ready to put it away. So next step is making sure that it retains its heat and doesn't get too cold, so that when they go to put it into the annealer, our cooling oven, which is an oxymoron, it's a kiln that stays at about 920 degrees so that the glass can cool off nice and slow. If you were to just let this glass stay out and try to cool on its own in room temperature, it's going to get too cold too fast and it's going to shatter and crack. So that's why we have to use an annealer, which is also called a cooling oven or a kiln, so that the glass can cool off very slowly, really just a couple of degrees an hour. So what Clifton was doing was making sure that that punty section doesn't get too cold, because everything's got to be a nice happy temperature, pretty equal in temperature, so that when they add a little bit of water and do that thermal shock to break it off, they have control over where that glass is going to break.
You ready for our polish?
Yep. So here's the really exciting part. They're going to add that little bit of water to it. Kevin's in some Kevlar gloves to get ready to catch it.
Ready? Yes.
Now he's going to tap that pipe, break it off, and then fire polish it. And they only have a few seconds to be able to do this before it gets too cold.
Right only.
And then into the annealer. And that was a lovely deer by Connor. That was absolutely fantastic. So thank you again for tuning in to our open studios here on this Friday at the studio with a successful deer in the annealer.
Does a lot in this community. We are a nonprofit dedicated to education and arts and culture. We do some fantastic events. Tonight is Open Studios Night, second Friday of every single month. Coming up on June 22nd, we have our Ice Cream Social. That's always a fun event. We're going to have a bunch of stuff for the community to engage with. So if you're in the area, June 22nd, come join us. Check that out online on our website. You can find out all information about that event. We're also running a fundraising campaign called Glassroots Revival. We're reviving the glass arts in Fort Worth, and this organization needs your help. So check us out online, and please participate and help us move this thing forward.